Why? No. What am I gonna do? Hey guys, some bad news this week. As I'm sure you've noticed, we didn't have FNO this week because we were all stuck inside our houses. And if you're like me, you probably responded a little bit like this. But have no fear, I found a solution. I thought to myself, how could I help the FNO crew even if we can't be together? And I think I've come up with a wonderful idea. So I would appreciate it if I could have a little bit of a round of applause at this moment. Thank you. You guys are all way too kind with the applause, and I really appreciate it. So I thought to myself, you know how you guys always all want to ask questions, but it's kind of like herding cats and everyone's all over the place? It looks a little bit like. Yep, just like that. So I thought to myself, okay, well, if I can control the questions that come in, maybe it'll make it a little bit easier for you guys to learn something when I give you some answers. So I thought to myself, what if we did questions with Pastor Nate? So our first question for today comes from Noah from Poughkeepsie, Mississippi. And Noah writes in and he asks the following. Pastor Nate, where do babies come from? So I may have to defer on that first question, but I'd like to quote the famous philosopher, Dr. Seuss, who says in one of his landmark books, one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. Not one of them is like another. I don't know why. Go ask your mother. Okay, so moving on. Noemi from Truth and Consequences, New Mexico, wants to know the following. Pastor Nate, if the Big Bang made the universe, what made the Big Bang? That's a fantastic question, Noemi, and it deserves a thoughtful response. So the reality is that let's assume that the Big Bang is what happened at the very beginning. That's what scientists look at and they see it and they go, it seems like there was a massive explosion at the very beginning and everything made that happen. Which is pretty awesome if you really think about it, that things came that way. But the truth is, and what we know about life, is that something can't come from nothing. Something always had to have come from something before. And that's actually where it leads to the idea of God. It actually makes a lot more sense that God would have been the thing that created that something. To which you might ask, okay, well that's cool, but then who created God? And that's also a very good question because the answer is no one. You see, in order for God to exist and for nothing to have created, let's put it this way. If something created God, it wouldn't be God. The only thing that could be God is something that always existed. So really, if we were to break it down, your two options when you think about this are either that something came from nothing and no God existed, which we look at the world around us and is a physical impossibility, or your other option is that God created that something from nothing. You see, when God speaks, things happen. And so if God were to say, tree exists, then tree would exist. If God were to say, cow exists, then cow exists. It's as simple as that because God is a non-material spiritual thing, and non-material spiritual things, when they speak as God, would have to inherently create. So that's actually why I tell people, I have no doubt that there was a Big Bang at the beginning. That actually, when God spoke, it probably made a very loud sound and things happened. I would actually argue that when scientists are looking from the very beginning and they're saying we see some sort of loud noise, it was actually God speaking things into existence. And the beautiful thing is, this is actually why Jesus came to this earth for us. Because Jesus came in the form of human. God exists outside of space and time, but Jesus transcended that space and time. He came to this earth. And this is a whole other question about Jesus' existence, But I promise you, there's a lot of good evidence for it, and maybe we can talk about that question coming up in not too far future, especially if we're stuck inside our houses for a little bit longer. That actually Jesus, when he came as God to this earth, it was so that humans could know in a very real and tangible way of God's existence. And so just because we haven't seen God doesn't mean that others haven't seen God. There's places in the world that I haven't seen. That doesn't mean that they don't exist. Others very well may have seen them at different times and in different places. The dodo bird, for example, no longer exists. But there are people who recorded that it existed. There were people who had seen it. And so I trust those reports because they're fairly accurate seeming that thing existed. I believe the same thing about Jesus, that he came, it was reported that he was God and that he performed miracles, and more than anything else, that he died, rose again on the third day, which is a pretty phenomenal thing. And this all ties back to the idea of, could God exist based upon all this? Did the Big Bang, did it happen on its own, or was it something that God spoke into existence? Let me say this. The possibilities that something came from nothing in just the Big Bang, no God exists theory, or the idea that something came from something that always existed, that is God, actually that second one makes a lot more sense, because the first one, from what we see from the physical realm around us, actually isn't even really possible. The second one, if we were to include the idea that the spiritual realm does exist, and I think the fact that we have souls and that we feel emotions indicates that a spiritual realm does exist, that one actually makes a whole lot more sense. It's a fantastic question and one we should keep talking about, but let's move on to the next question. All right, our final question comes from Nathaniel from Why Not, North Carolina. Nathaniel wants to know, Pastor Nate, is the coronavirus a judgment by God sent to punish people? Nathaniel, this is a fantastic question, and my guess is it's one that many people are wondering and asking now. The truth is there's no way for us to know unless God himself actually speaks to one of us and tells us that that's real, but that's the case. But from what we know from the Bible is that was how God chose to speak in that time, and it's going to stay that way until Jesus comes back. So while it is possible that God is using it to punish people, there's just no way we can know. So here's what we do know. We do know that sin causes sickness and hurt and pain in this world. When we sin, we cause sickness and hurt and pain. But we also know that same sort of sin that exists inside us, when Adam and Eve sinned in the very beginning, they brought that same sort of sickness and dying and pain to the whole world. So it didn't just impact humans. It's the reason why your dog dies. It's the reason why trees die. It's the reason why everything has a lifespan, and it's all going to fade away in the end. And that means that there are things like viruses which go around, and they're eventually going to make our lives end, because, for some of us at least, because that's the way life goes, is that everything has a beginning and an end. So what's our responsibility? Well, our responsibility is to be faithful stewards of the life that God has given us. So while we don't know whether or not a certain virus was sent to punish people, in fact, I would be inclined to say that probably not. It doesn't really seem that God works that way anymore. That while that could be, because he's God and he can do what he wants, that more than likely our responsibility now as believers in God and believers in Christ is that we need to, make sure that we are a responsible citizen in our community. So if that means we need to stay inside as much as we don't want to stay inside maybe, we still need to be conscientious to do that, because even though you may just get a little bit sick, you can pass that disease on, or you pass that virus on to someone who it may really impact in a serious way. And so we want to make sure that we're careful not to do that. It also means that when we're around people who are sick, we need to be that much more conscientious of the way that we seek to love other people and care for them, because not everyone's in the same place as us. And so we need to realize when we're in a position where we can help people and care for them. The third thing, actually, I think that, and this is one of the most important things that this virus teaches us, is the need for us to steward each day well. You have no guarantees of what tomorrow will bring. A lot of us live our lives thinking that tomorrow is guaranteed, but tomorrow isn't guaranteed. And while there's a high probability that tomorrow is guaranteed for you, you just don't know. And so we want to value life. We don't want to just say, you know what, I'm going to waste a little bit of time now because it doesn't really matter. No, life matters, and we want to take every day and live it to the fullest in whatever way we are able to do that. And so that means we don't want to be lazy and just say, it doesn't really matter, I can waste some time, because we don't have days guaranteed to us. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons we can take from all of this, is to live each day. None of us 2 weeks ago thought we'd be stuck in our houses and wouldn't be able to go to things like FNO, wouldn't be able to go to school, that we wouldn't be able to hang out with our friends. None of us were thinking that way. But here we are. So that's how I would answer that. No, I don't think this is a punishment from God. If it is, that's his choice. He hasn't chosen to communicate that to us. But what it does mean is that we need to live responsibly with those who are around us, and we need to love and care for those people no matter what, taking advantage and appreciating every day for what it is. And it's a gift. And so we want to appreciate it for that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so I'm going to go take care of myself. Thanks for coming out, guys. Appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see each other soon. Bye.